Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. Has it been a great day so far, or what?
Yeah.
It's really feeling like an amazing event. Come on in, we're just getting started. Okay, so as you probably know by now, I'm Big Hartman. I'm the Executive Director and General Counsel at the Human Rights Commission. I'm going to be moderating this panel today. This discussion is focused on what are the limits of our current voting access systems and explore what changes are needed to ensure full and equitable participation in our democratic system, especially for people with disabilities in Vermont. So I'm so grateful for these wonderful three speakers we have joining us today. So we're going to start by just going around and doing some brief introductions. Yeah, Laura, let's start with you since you're here in the room and you're going to navigate the slopey stage area here carefully.
I'm Laura Cushman. I am an attorney at Disability Rights Vermont and have been prioritizing voting access and accessibility quite a bit this year. So thank you for having me, and thank you, Big, for inviting me, and I'm honored to be a part of this presentation.
Okay, and our other two speakers are joining us remotely. So Kate, why don't you start with a brief introduction and then we'll go to Maria.
Laura, thank you so much, Big. Well, to start with, I just want to say before I jump in that no accommodations were requested for today's session, but this is being recorded for later sharing. So an accessible copy of my presentation with my spoken words and visual descriptions of all images is available at tinyurl.com/VT voting rights. So I just want to make sure that is available for folks. Let me go to my introduction slides. Hello, my name is Kate LaRose, and I like voting. And I care about voting rights. I care because I have a core belief that community and democracy are both stronger when everyone is able to take part. In 2019, I was an active and civically engaged member of my community. I felt valued by my town. I had access to participate in discussions that mattered to me. Voting was easy. There were no barriers in place that kept me from running for office. I had the right to reform and alter government, and I enjoyed the common benefits of living in Vermont. Shortly thereafter, I became disabled, and all of those rights were taken from me in a world built upon ableist structures and traditions. Today, I want to share that story with you, but please know that my story is not unique. Despite years of asking people in power politely and doing the work of testifying and organizing with peers, I have been unable to vote in my local elections for a very long time. Me and other disabled Vermonters are tired of being told to patiently wait for the state to grant a civil right we already possess. And as I share my story, I will ask you to consider yours. Thank you for being here today. It means that you also like and care about voting rights. And so I have some questions for you, all of you who are participating today. I'll ask you two questions now and one at the end. Are you ready? All right, here we go. First question. What are your core values when it comes to voting access? I'm going to give you 15 seconds of silence to reflect on this right now. What are your core values when it comes to voting access? Okay, keep that in mind for the next bit. Here's your second question. When traditions exclude, what do you believe should be done? This time, I invite you to jot down your thoughts on paper or on your phone, and I'm going to give you 30 seconds to do so. So please keep that somewhere nearby so that you can refer to it at the end of our time together. Thank you, and back to Big.
Thanks, Kate. Maria, do you want to just briefly introduce yourself, and then I will do a little spiel?
All right. Thank you, Big. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maria Rinaldi. I live in Jericho, Vermont. I am an advocate and activist for disability rights. You'll get to know a little bit more about me in a moment, but it's probably helpful to let you know that I am in a wheelchair, paralyzed from the chest down. So you can't see that on the screen. It's probably helpful information, especially in this context. And I'm here today as a member of Town of Jericho's DEI committee to discuss our efforts to end the town's exclusionary in-person floor votes on town meeting day. So looking forward to sharing that discussion with you.
Thank you so much. Welcome to you all. So when we think of voting, we all think that the right to vote is totally fundamental to our functioning democracy, right? But in fact, our original U.S. Constitution, as passed originally, it did not guarantee the right to vote to anyone. The original Vermont Constitution, which was passed in 1777, stated that all elections ought to be free and that all free men having a sufficient, evident common interest with an attachment to the community have the right to elect officers or be elected into office. At the time, this was seen as a really expansive provision because most states only allowed voting for landowners. So we started off a little more expansive than many states at the time. However, it took almost another 100 years for the 14th and 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution to get passed for all male inhabitants to have the right to vote in the United States, and to ensure that the right to vote would not be denied or abridged based on race or color. Women achieved the right to vote in the 19th Amendment ratification in 1920, and our Vermont Constitution was amended accordingly in 1924. So that takes us to 100 years ago, when it's finally unlawful to be denied the right to vote based on sex, race, or color. It still took several decades for the disability community to be guaranteed the same anti-discrimination protections when it comes to voting access. And that is in 1991. When the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed. Our state version of the ADA is contained in the Vermont Fair Housing and Public Accommodations Act, which is one of the main areas of jurisdiction that our office, the Human Rights Commission, enforces. So the ADA and its state counterpart are meant to apply to all aspects of government, including voting rights, polling places, and town meeting. Town meetings, we all know, probably, that they're looked at as a really significant Vermont tradition, right? Direct democracy, where community members come together to discuss in person and vote on issues in their town, like live and in real life. Now, not all towns have an in-person town meeting for local votes and elections, and many have opted to enable what they call Australian ballot, which is just a fancy way of saying secret paper ballots. Currently, almost 70% of Vermont towns use one or more floor votes for their local decisions. That means that people who, for any reason, can't be in the room don't get to vote on town officers in 76 towns. They don't get to vote on the town budget in 152 towns, and they don't get to vote on other public questions in 133 towns. We have seen overwhelmingly that towns who hold all town votes by Australian ballot have a significantly higher voter turnout rate as compared to towns who vote all items by floor. Right? Town meeting floor vote turnout is often less than 20% of the actual voters in the town. So while Vermont is ranked very high for making it easy for people to vote, right? Like we don't have to show ID when we go to our polling places, and we have a lot of expansive rights for people to vote. When it was recently analyzed by MIT in 2022, which was comparing state election processes across the country, MIT's Elections Performance Index ranked Vermont 49th in the US for disability access. And this is really largely due to how towns are conducting elections, and it's not really about statewide elections, right? So lately, our office, the Human Rights Commission, has been increasingly concerned about how voters with disabilities are facing a lot of barriers to voting and participating in town meeting and other public decisions. And that's what's prompted us to have this discussion at this summit today. So I want to invite Laura from Disability Rights to please start off this conversation by telling us what your organization, Disability Rights Vermont, has done to address accessibility of voting in Vermont. And now, hazards abound here. So that is the mic you'll want to use. Sure. Okay.
Am I on? So yeah, I guess just to start out, I want to give you a little bit of about what has been being done before this MIT study and all of this coming to light of like what's not happening, what efforts have been made, and where we still need to go. This is going to be a little tricky figuring out the pushing of the buttons and the holding of the mic. Hold on just a second.
There's a clicker. I don't know if that works. Just click in the middle.
Just hit the space.
Yep. Just hit the cursor.
I'm sorry. Where am I? Where am I clicking to advance? Oh, anywhere. Great.
So then you can go. Technology.
Thank you. Sorry. Should have done a test run. Okay. So a little bit about, again, my name is Laura Cushman. I work at Disability Rights Vermont. I am an attorney there. I did want to say, again, thank you to HRC for putting this together. Thanks to HRC for putting this together. And also to my co-panelists who are experts with regard to this particular topic and who I continue to learn from and have been through our voting accessibility efforts this year. So a little bit about Disability Rights Vermont. Disability Rights Vermont is the designated protection and advocacy agency for the state of Vermont, the P&A, as we say often. For those of you who don't know, the P&A system traces back to a movement by people, like all civil rights movements and laws. Those of you who are a little older may remember a journalist named Geraldo Rivera. He first gained notoriety in 1972 by exposing the aberrant conditions and abuse of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who were residents of a New York State facility on Long Island that was called Willowbrook. And that exposure to those inhumane conditions and inhumane treatment of people with disabilities inspired people to action. And in 1975, the Developmental Disabilities Assistance and Bill of Rights, or the DD Act, was passed because people made a difference. The DD Act mandated that each state each state's governor would designate a P&A, a protection and advocacy agency. All 50 states and the U.S. territories have a designated P&A. Disability Rights Vermont is Vermont's P&A. Advanced slide. So we do a lot of different things, but in the beginning, the primary scope of the work was to address past mistreatment and to ensure equal treatment, dignity, and respect for people with developmental disabilities. Much of the work was monitoring hospitals and residential facilities to prevent and report abuse. But over the years, as part of a larger disability movement, protection and advocacy funding has expanded to provide services for other people with disabilities, including people with mental illness. I'm sorry, that is how our government actually calls the funding. Traumatic brain injury, beneficiaries of Social Security, and people who use assistive technology, among others. DRVT is a law office with attorneys and investigators. Our services are more than just monitoring facilities now. We provide information, referrals, self-advocacy assistance, advocacy services, including legal representation when appropriate. We also prioritize advocating for necessary policy and systems changes for the dignity, respect, and equal treatment of people with disabilities. We are primarily federally funded through several protection and advocacy grants. One of the grants that we receive is for the protection and advocacy for voting access. This grant comes out of money that was appropriated for the Help America Vote Act. We'll talk about HAVA. Some of the ways that we use those HAVA funds, are to do registration drives, polling place surveys, individual absentee ballot assistance, individual registration, education. We produce a voter guide before general elections. HAVA also improved access to voting for people with disabilities. And it was passed by Congress to make sweeping reforms to the nation's voting process, addresses improvements to voting systems and voter access that were identified following the 2000 election. So along with some of these improvements that were made by HAVA, provisional voting, voting information, etc., HAVA has also assisted people with disabilities by guaranteeing that voters with disabilities have the right to mark, cast, and verify their ballots privately and independently without the need of assistance of others if they choose to, unless they choose to have assistance. It also provided that there needed to be accessible voting systems. It requires that at least one accessible voting machine be available at every polling place for federal elections. These machines are designated to assist individuals with various impairments, vision impairments, mobility impairments, etc. It also provided the funding, the HAVA funding that we get, and also provided funding to enhance polling places so that polling places could receive funds to acquire accessible voting technology. And then HAVA also provides for poll training, poll worker training, so that the training of election individuals and officials and poll workers on the rights of voters with disabilities and how to provide appropriate assistance. And of course, there are, HAVA is not the only controlling federal law with regards to voting. You know, obviously, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the Constitution, of course, provides for our rights to equal protection. But with regards to people with disabilities, the Americans with Disabilities Act also provides for voter protection and requires that state and local governments and their election officials to ensure that people with disabilities have full and equal opportunity to vote in all elections. And that includes federal, state, and local elections. And here is where we start to have a little bit of trouble in the state of Vermont in the local elections arena. So it also includes parts of voting like voter registration, selecting a location for polling places and voting, whether on election day or in an earlier absentee voting process. But it covers all of the parts of the electoral system, right? Not just the actual casting of the vote. So some of the ways in which we use our funding from the federal government to assist voters with disabilities, oh, it looks like there might be a, we have served since 2002 funding, HAVA funding, we have served 1,563 people and 1,856 total cases. And those break down to like voter registration. We've assisted 1,364 people to register to vote. One of our big initiatives that we do is that we reach out to incarcerated persons and assist folks who are incarcerated to register to vote. We help people with, you know, what may seem like very simple things like helping them update their mailing addresses, making sure they're getting their voter registrations, helping them obtain absentee ballots, confirming their registration or their ballot returns. And then we also get calls from individuals in our community who express their accessibility challenges to voting, to participating in the open meetings and the and public processes. Did it go? It went. So as I mentioned, DRVT conducts polling place surveys, and these surveys are basic audits for physical structural barriers to voting. And this is something that we've been doing ongoing for since 2002, essentially. These polling place surveys are absolutely voluntary. They are not mandated. No town or polling place in Vermont is mandated to undergo these surveys, but we reach out to the towns and ask them if we can come and survey their polling places. And as of now, there are 265 polling locations in Vermont, and we have completed surveys of 242 of those polling places. Only one town has declined to participate. Everybody generally welcomes us to come and have a look at whether or not their space is physically accessible. These are just some illustrations of some of the survey activities: measuring, counting accessible parking spaces, doorways, ramp angles, accessible door handles, etc. So this space here in this it's a photograph of a parking spot. It's just a single lane parking spot, and the accessible parking space that's pictured here is not in compliance with ADA standards because it does not have the required access aisle or a van accessible parking sign. This is the most common structural barrier that we see in terms of polling place accessibility. There just aren't designated parking spots for people to come and vote. So also accessible entrances. This photograph is a level across a threshold at a doorway with a measuring tape that shows that the threshold is 2 inches high. And so it is not in compliance with ADA standards because a threshold can be no higher than 3/4 of an inch at the door and beveled on each side so that it can be accessed by someone with a mobility device. Accessible route, same thing. The route has to be smooth enough-ish. It should be about 36 inches wide, and there are some exceptions to that for utility poles, etc. But this pathway is not in compliance because it has a big dip in it, and so it's not an accessible route because it has an abrupt level change of approximately 1¼ inches. In this photo is a pathway showing a measuring tape measuring the 1¼ inch drop in the pathway. And then accessibility ramps. Lots of polling places do have them, but often they're not entirely in compliance. So this one is lacking a second handrail on the other side, and it lacks edge protections, especially where there's no handrail to stop rolling wheelchair. So this is a ramp that's not in compliance. So what we do, these are most common issues. These are the sort of most common issues that we see. Once we have completed a polling place survey, DRVT will send a letter to the town or the polling place that contains the results of our survey and our recommendations on what can be done to bring their polling place into compliance with the ADA regarding physical, structural accessibility only. We are not in our polling place surveys checking to see whether or not they know how to respond to a reasonable accommodation request, for instance. We are just simply looking at the structural facility. There we send these recommendations and just as with polling places they're not mandated to undergo the survey, they're also not required to do anything about our recommendations. So they may get a list of a few things that they might need to work on, but there's no follow-up to make sure that they've done any of those. And so what I will say, however, is that most of our polling place surveys have been well received, and we will sometimes get updates from towns when improvements have been made, and we've been sent photographs of the changes that have been made. So, but physical accessibility barriers, like I said, are not the only problem. In addition to those, previously noted, once again, polling places, individuals with disabilities may face additional barriers, and that's a lot of what the next presenters will be talking about. Physical accessibility not being the only problem, what other barriers to engagement and participation are voters facing? I will say that we also conducted some focus groups. Won't get too much into this, but in December of 2019 and March 2020, we did have 10 focus groups where 126 participants from a diverse community of people responded and participated and identified some of these barriers that they're still experiencing that aren't physical barriers and some proposed solutions. And is part of our ongoing engagement. So in Vermont, people may not know, and a lot of education needs to happen to make sure that Vermonters understand that they have a right to vote if they're a guardian, if they have a guardian, if they need help filling out a ballot, if they're homeless, if they've been convicted of a crime, if they cannot vote in person on election day. This is a place where in some voting situations, we have a struggle as Big mentioned. If we have a floor vote on town meeting day, then a person cannot vote if they can't be present. And so there are some additional rights for people in voting. And it's some very basic information that we could be better about educating. And lastly, I would just like to say that lately, as of 2023-24 biennium, DRVT has been engaged in advocacy with voting rights for people with disabilities as a member of the Act 133 working group, which came out of the 23-24 biennium S55, was proposed to amend open meeting law. And it was heavily amended, and a working group was created, and so Disability Rights Vermont is named member of that working group, and I think that Kate and Maria will be able to help you understand some of the reasons why at this time there's no consensus among the members of the working group, and many of the items that are still being discussed in terms of violations of the rights of peoples with disabilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Laura. I know we're going to have a lot more that we're going to want to ask you about, but I really want to give some space to our remote speakers, and I want to also let them know I had like this all Virgo agenda of exactly how many minutes we would have for everything. We started later than the original schedule, so we're going to go a little bit later than the original plan, and that's okay. Everything's kind of been a few minutes behind today. No worries. I don't want you to feel rushed or squeezed into your presentations because you both have such important stories to share with us. So we're going to hear from Maria next. And Maria, thank you so much for joining this discussion today. I really wanted to invite you to share your personal story about what drives your advocacy. I'd like you to share with our participants today what your experience as a person with a disability navigating the political landscape has been, and how that journey has ignited your work to improve the accessibility of voting and town meeting in Jericho. I think it would be great for the audience to hear what lessons you've learned that you can share with audience members who might be interested in expanding access to local democracy in their towns. So take it away, Maria.
Thank you, Big. Are you able to see my presentation on the screen?
Yes, we are. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you for allowing me this opportunity to share my story. Very excited to be here. This title slide of my presentation features a photo taken of me at an art exhibit that was centered on chairs and democracy. It prominently displays the powerful words of Shirley Chisholm: "If they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair." As the first Black woman elected to Congress and to seek the Democratic presidential nomination, Chisholm demanded radical inclusion. Her fight was for a democracy where every person has an equal right to participation. That fight continues today for those still marginalized and seeking an equal seat at the table. As a wheelchair user, I like to say that I have taken Shirley Chisholm's challenge to heart because I literally bring my chair with me wherever I go. My political involvement began in 1999. As a disabled college student almost ready to graduate, I was surprised to learn that entering the workforce would mean losing my essential Medicaid health insurance, a fundamental policy failure that effectively locked countless disabled Americans out of the job market. Luckily, at that same time, Senator Jim Jeffords from Vermont was working with Senator Ted Kennedy on the Work Incentives Improvement Act, which would allow working people with disabilities to keep their Medicaid insurance. He used my story in his testimony on the Senate floor, as seen here. Thanks to the passage of that law, I've been able to work for St. Michael's College for the past 27 years. This experience taught me how policy dictates possibility, and that when your voice is amplified by the system, it has the power to change lives. My advocacy continued, and in 2016 and 2020, I was honored to serve as a Vermont Pledge delegate for Senator Bernie Sanders to the Democratic National Convention. I ran on the platform of universal health care, or Medicare for all, because once again, policy was limiting my personal freedom, telling me I couldn't marry the person I love without losing my much needed long-term care Medicaid health insurance. The 2016 convention in Philadelphia was billed as the most accessible ever. It was anything but. The most upsetting issue was that I couldn't sit with my Vermont delegation because no one had the forethought to seat states with delegates in wheelchairs near the wheelchair accessible sections of the stadium seating. With all the buzz around Senator Sanders, who was running to be the party's presidential nominee, the Vermont delegation was getting a lot of attention, yet I could only watch from afar, unable to sit with my peers. The photo on the right shows the Vermont section in the stadium. My partner had to lean out from the wheelchair section to get this photo. You can see the handrail coming out the left side of the photo, indicating the stairs that takes delegates down to the Vermont section. I didn't let it stop me, though. The next night, I insisted on sitting at the top of the stairs for the ceremonial roll call as Vermont proudly cast its vote for Bernie. That's my head in the white circle of the photo on the left. You can see Bernie holding the microphone underneath the Vermont sign. In the photo on the right, Bernie is climbing the stairs just after his speech, where he stopped to shake my hand. Then came 2020 and a worldwide pandemic. The Democratic Convention was forced to go virtual. Suddenly, everyone had an equal seat at the table. Attending a convention is typically expensive, as delegates must fund their own travel and hotel expenses. By going virtual, a delegate's economic status or disability was no longer an obstacle to participation. This format clearly demonstrated what equitable and accessible democracy should look like. However, as we are returning to, quote, normal from COVID, we are seeing legislative systems retreat from these accessible practices. My short stint with national politics opened my eyes to a system resistant to change. I shifted my focus to the local level, where I thought I could make a greater and more immediate impact. In 2022, I became a founding member of the Town of Jericho's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Part of our core mission is to identify ways to ensure all residents are able to and feel welcome in participating in the civic life of the community and are well served by town government. We decided to take on the ambitious challenge of voting access. On town meeting day in March, like most towns across the state, Jericho used an exclusionary in-person floor vote for its town budget and public questions. This system created a significant barrier to democracy for many, including working people and those with disabilities. Big already touched on a lot of the kind of Australian ballot versus floor vote, but for me, having grown up in Winooski, where we use the Australian ballot system, I had no experience of what the town meeting floor vote was like until I moved to Jericho. So here's again the list of differences. I think maybe the only other one I would like to point out is the one main difference for Australian ballot. You do not have the ability to amend anything that's on the ballot. It's a pre-printed uniform ballot, whereas the floor vote allows you to have direct discussion of the article, budget, or question is held at the meeting. Voters can speak or propose amendments and debate before the vote is taken. So let's move on. Just to refresh your memory, there are four main uses that these voting methods are used for, and that's the school budget, town officials, like electing your town officials, the town budget, and public questions. These all began as floor votes, and over the years, towns have voted to move some or all of them to Australian ballot. Let's see. Jericho had moved their school budget and election of town officials previously, but kept the town budget and public questions to a floor vote. So in 2023, when our DEI committee took on the challenge of voting access, this is what Vermont looked like when it came to towns who used Australian ballot for these two items. Only 77 out of 247 towns used an Australian ballot for the town budget, and 97 out of 247 used it for public questions. This next slide compares the average turnout in Jericho for the floor meeting versus those who submitted a ballot over a 10-year period. I know it's a lot of numbers, but the two most important columns are circled. You can see that at least double the ballots are submitted versus a floor vote, if not significantly more. In fact, when you take the 10-year average, attendance for the floor vote in Jericho averaged only 6.6%, or 266 voters, whereas the Australian ballot on non-presidential election years averaged 19%, or 758 voters. This jumps to 49%, or 2,003 voters on presidential election years. After looking at the numbers, Jericho's DEI committee decided to survey its residents to hear what their experience was like. We received 72 responses, and it was a good mix. A third of the respondents had attended the floor vote on town meeting day regularly. A third had never attended at all, and the last third had some experience with it. What we found was that 56% of respondents said it was difficult to attend the floor vote because of work, family, and other obligations, or for health and disability reasons. 74% said that they'd be more likely to vote on town articles and the town budget if they could vote by Australian ballot. And an overwhelming 90% agreed that voting by Australian ballot would provide greater access to town decision making, while only 14% said that moving to Australian ballot would negatively impact Jericho's democratic process. Here are some quotes from the survey that offer reasons to keep town meeting. Reason 1, it's a chance to discuss and weight the issues before voting. I know I've changed my mind due to better understanding thanks to discussion. Reason 2, if the budget does not pass, a second election would be needed, and that's very true. Reason 3, amendments wouldn't be possible with a paper ballot, plus the loss of a face-to-face meeting would be a great loss of the community. This fourth reason is a little long, but I think it's important to include because it's how some people really feel. And they say, I've attended most years since it was held in the town room in the basement of the Congregational Church in Jericho Center, taking vacation days if needed. Today's venue is handicap accessible, so the issue is, do we take away the rights of the many to make amendments from the floor to enhance the rights of the very few who are so handicapped they cannot access a handicap accessible facility? Sad that this is a choice we need to make, but in the end, not that difficult. We should not change town meeting to take away the majority's rights in order to accommodate those few who want to preserve their vacation days. And here are some quotes of reasons to move to Australian ballot. Reason 1, current day town meeting is an ancient and inconvenient means of dealing with town matters. 20 people should not be making decisions for 5,000, and I have no idea how any of that is acceptable or even legal, to be honest. Reason 2, greater participation and less chance of people adding spend items to the budget with very little oversight. Reason 3, privacy of vote, no grunts from the audience. Reason 4, actually having a voice. I'm unable to commit an entire day during the week to the town meeting. And even if I could join, typically the loudest voices win the day. Reason 5, it would allow anyone who wishes to vote but can't spend hours at town meeting to have a say. I feel a very few town residents get a say now. I vote in all other votes but can't vote in this one, which bothers me. And our final one, which is really about the work of what the DEI committee was doing. No matter what time you schedule a meeting, someone is working, someone has childcare, someone has elder care, someone is sick, etc. So to be fully inclusive, we need Australian ballot. The Jericho DEI committee brought all of this research and information to the select board in hopes of them warning the 2 following articles at the upcoming town meeting. The select board could have said no and requested that we collect signatures from the town to reach a certain threshold for the items to be automatically warned. But they listened to us as their advisory committee and agreed to bring these questions up for discussion and a vote at the next town meeting. The DEI committee spent weeks educating the town through posts on Front Porch Forum and recruiting registered voters to attend to make their voices heard. The feedback we were getting was good, but the town meeting day turnout remained typical, around 200 people. I did have a couple of people come up to me and share that they normally couldn't attend, but made the effort to come because they had hoped it would make it possible to vote for their town budget in the future. One father shared with me that his son requires nursing care 24 hours a day, making it close to impossible for him to attend regularly. The discussions on the microphone were long and passionate. Regular attendees saw the inclusive benefit of moving to Australian ballot, but they hated to lose the face-to-face discussions. Amendments were offered and approved, which transformed the original articles to still move the budget and public questions to Australian ballot, but also directed the select board to hold something similar to town meeting where items can be discussed and adjustments proposed, but the final budget numbers and public questions would be approved by Australian ballot. It was an amendment that the DEI committee felt okay supporting, and it felt like most of the room supported it as well. But there was one more step I wanted to take to make sure these articles passed without intimidation. Remember how I said the voting process at a floor meeting is done by voice or hand raising? I learned that a paper ballot could happen if it met certain parameters. Namely, one person calling for the paper ballot and 6 additional people supporting it. I pre-warned the town clerk, the town moderator, and select board that I would be calling for a paper ballot as it would require checking attendees against the voter rolls, a step always done at polling centers, but usually skipped at floor meetings. As soon as the moderator called the question for a vote, I shouted for a paper ballot. Groans rang out in the room, but 6 people stood up and joined my call, and the long process for a paper ballot vote began. The votes were counted and announced. Those in favor, 102, and those against, 65. The article passed. The subsequent article for public questions carried by momentum, passed by voice vote.
Yay, yay.
Yay! As a result of these amendments, a town meeting reimagined task force was created by the select board. I was asked to join as a representative from the DEI committee. Together, we developed a three-step process that begins with a hybrid meeting in the fall to bring residents together to voice what direction they'd like to see the town take as they develop the budget for the upcoming year. In January, a hybrid meeting similar to traditional town meeting is held where the select board takes the public through the budget and attendees make advisory amendments through voice and hand votes. The select board takes these amendments and considers adjusting the budget or warning large ticket items that are then voted on by registered voters via the Australian ballot. The limits of our current voting access systems are not always physical, like the lack of a ramp. They are structural, like an exclusionary floor vote, and they are often intentional by design to give the power to the few. My experience has been that when the system is redesigned for maximum accessibility, it benefits everyone and creates truly equitable participation. Democracy can and must be more accessible than it currently is. I'm excited to see where we go from here.
Thank you so much, Maria. You probably couldn't hear from there that we were clapping and just very, very happy, especially when you shared the vote success that you had there in your town. Really amazing story. And I think it really illustrates how Vermont has this capacity for us to have influence in what's happening in our towns. Okay, thank you so much, Maria. I'm going to turn now to Kate LaRose. And Kate, from all the meetings we've had this year, I know that this is a topic you've spent a ton of time working on and thinking about. So please share with us the barriers and problems that you've identified with how elections and town meetings work in Vermont.
Thank you, Big. Barriers and problems. Here we go.
Yes.
So I need to start by stating very clearly that disability isn't the problem. Ableism is. The moment we start talking about access needs or reasonable accommodations or anything needing to change to meet universal design for all, the framing and pushback that comes next is almost always rooted in ableism and other popular forms of oppression. And here's a few examples of what that sounds like. We can't change everything for one person. That will cost money. This is our tradition and we've always done it that way. It's not fair to others. It's not my job. Change takes time. Be patient. The voter suppression and civil rights violations currently impacting many disabled Vermonters also impact working people, caregivers, incarcerated people, unhoused people, those without transportation, and those who do not feel safe or are not safe amongst their neighbors, including survivors of domestic violence, LGBTQIA+ individuals, and those who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And this hurts us all. My favorite part of being disabled is when a non-disabled person explains my rights to me. I'll be like, hey, I can't vote. And a well-meaning person will say, have you heard about the ADA? Just ask for an accommodation. And this sounds great in theory, but I want to share a few examples of how this plays out in reality in towns both large and small. In August of 2021, the City of St. Albans held a meeting to create their Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Community members wanting to public comment reached out to the city manager requesting hybrid virtual access. The city manager initially declined an ADA request for inclusion to a DEI meeting. After some back and forth, they eventually honored the request for accommodations, but made sure to add they weren't happy about it, stating, quote, "We find the quality of participation diminishes greatly when we are not in the same room." The city manager eventually did the right thing, but he wanted it known that our access needs were definitely harshing the vibe. In 2022, a $2 billion high voltage energy line project was being proposed to be installed right in front of my house, just feet from where my child gets her monthly IV infusions. The select board was tasked with making what would have been the biggest decision they'd ever made to date, with consequential health and environmental impacts for any properties along the proposed route. These were the accommodations I asked for: video and audio access to public meetings when this item was on the agenda, the ability to public comment remotely, electronic access to materials shared at these meetings. This request required the select board to put me and my accommodations requests on a public meeting agenda. After they talked about me and my disability, the select board determined that no accommodations would be offered unless I provided them with a letter from a medical provider. For accommodations that are already standard operating procedure in most towns across the state, jumping through this additional hoop, a barrier put in place just because they could, required me to take time off work and pay for a medical appointment, and resulted in a 3-month delay in my access to meetings. In the end, they approved my request and then offered Zoom access to the entire community. But here's what that accommodation cost in effort and dollars: 3 hours of the town clerk's time, 3 hours of time from select board meetings over 2 meetings, $0 in equipment, as they already had Zoom from the start of the pandemic, and then for me, the disabled voter, it took 8 hours of effort, 3 months, and $250 in medical appointment fees and lost work hours. In my current town of residence, I haven't been able to vote for 4 years. I, along with my husband, who is currently mostly bedbound, have asked for accommodations of Australian ballot or remote town meeting access every year. And every year we are denied. Here's what's involved in getting that annual denial. My request for voting rights is put on the select board meeting agenda. Me, my disability, and my accommodations request are discussed amongst my neighbors. I'm invited to attend and plead my case as to why I believe I should be able to vote. This must be done in open public session per current state law. My request is deemed not reasonable. I am unable to watch a recording of the meeting or go to a website to access the meeting minutes in which this was decided. In 4 years of requests, this is the closest I ever came to getting accommodations: a blank screen with no access to town meeting day presentations, bad sound quality, and no ability to vote or talk. Here's another thing non-disabled people to me say sometimes. Hey, did you know that you can request curbside voting in Vermont? And that's sort of true, but only for items that use Australian ballot. Where I live, town budgets, officers, and public questions all require floor votes, but school budgets and officers use Australian ballot. Last year, I contacted the town clerk the day before elections to request curbside. I was told they were closed on Mondays and too busy during town meeting to consider curbside requests. I showed up anyways and stood outside in the snow with this sign. I patiently asked each person who walked past me if they could have the town clerk bring me my ballot. It took over an hour, but I eventually got the right to vote on the school items, but none of the town items, but only because Disability Rights Vermont helped to make it happen. But while I was waiting outside trying to ask my neighbors for help, someone opened the door and yelled, "You don't look too disabled to me," and then slammed the door shut again. It was one of my select board members, who I can't vote for.
Yeah.
So, what's stopping towns from remote town meeting options? Well, at this juncture, it seems to be policy guidance from the Vermont Secretary of State's office. And I want to echo what Maria said earlier, that policy dictates possibility. In 2023, towns that asked about remote meeting access were told it wasn't possible, even though federal ADA law trumps state laws. And a town that had been offering it for over a decade as an accommodation was told to stop. As of last week, the Secretary of State's office has yet to rescind this guidance that kept towns from offering this accommodation. Earlier this month at a press conference, our Secretary of State said, quote, "I want to make sure that every eligible Vermonter is able to vote." In that press conference, she spoke a lot about, quote, disengaged voters. Oh, another thing I love as a disabled person is when me and my peers are called disengaged by non-disabled people, when what we actually are is systemically discriminated against, marginalized, and our votes suppressed. Back in 2024, the legislature charged the Secretary of State's office with leading a working group to make recommendations to the legislature that would improve accessibility of meetings and elections and increase accountability and trust in government. I currently serve as the Vermont Human Rights Commission designee on this Act 133 group, and I'm the only member who's currently denied the right to vote. The report will be submitted later this month, but currently the draft, authored by the Secretary of State's office, is beyond disappointing. The report currently fails to make any recommendations that would resolve the voter suppression, that's what it is, I'm going to say it again, that would resolve the voter suppression happening in 68% of towns. There are no explicit recommendations for changes to the law, including the ones their office cites as barriers. And the entire framing throughout is that someone should maybe do something about it someday. It's important to note that 4 of the 8 voting working group members represent town membership associations. One of these associations, the Vermont Municipal Clerks and Treasurers Association, recently surveyed their members about their opinions on issues such as accessible town meeting options so that all voters can vote. They sent their results to all Act 133 members to represent their stance. I want to highlight some of those results with you. This chart asks, where are you at with the idea of requiring annual meetings to be hybrid? On a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being no and 5 being yes, only 8% said yes. The survey also requested comments from the membership, and I want to read a few of them exactly as they were written. The state should stay out of local government. If people want to participate, they should make the effort to attend a meeting. Everything is being handed to everyone, so no one takes responsibility for anything. All that sounds good in theory to those who don't have to implement it. Small towns don't have the staff or budgets available to implement things like this. We already mail ballots to those who can't make the polls. If voters are that driven to vote, they can call their town clerks and get an absentee ballot sent to them. Not in favor of any kind of non-in-person voting or town meetings. That would take the whole community aspect and rural nature of all Vermont towns out of the picture. If you want to have your voice heard, go to meetings and represent in person. I can't even begin to say what a hardship these ideas are for a small town with very little staffing. Residents need to come to meetings and vote. These are the very individuals who decide to provide or deny reasonable accommodations requests at the local level. And that's a problem. Thank you.
Okay, you are fire. Oh my gosh. It's been, I've been really proud that I designated Kate LaRose to serve on that working group. And also I feel the incredible burden that she has to play there, being the only person in the room, you know, who has a disability and is facing this barrier. If we're having conversations about accessibility for people with disabilities, the center of the room should be the people with the disabilities, not the elected officials who are living in a different reality, honestly. So
I just want to second that as a witness to what Kate has had to experience attending these working group meetings. It is exactly as she depicts it, that the people who are making the decisions have all of that ableist bias, and she gets it every time we're in those meetings.
okay. So I want to make sure we have some time for questions, but before that, I have one question for each of our panelists, which is the magic wand question. If you had a magic wand and you could make something change to ensure that all Vermonters could meaningfully participate in town meetings and local elections, what would you do? Laura, let's start with you.
I think since January, when I'm up at night, I am thinking about what we do as giant holes are cut in our safety net, and as people appear to be losing any say or power, and our Constitution is being attacked, and all I can think, I've questioned whether or not I'm in the right place in the revolution, if you will, and 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 if there's a better way, if there's another way for me to be collaborating with my community to help us at a grassroots, nonprofit, public entity level to sew up the holes that are being cut in our safety net and to have better collaboration. And if I could wave a magic wand, we would all telepathically know what your organization is doing and what your organization is doing and what your organization is doing, so that when we get the call for help, we know exactly where to go, exactly where to go. This person has a voting rights issue. These folks are dedicating their time, effort, energy, and funds to deal with that issue, et cetera. And so I think and this conference, this summit has really been, I'm hearing this over and over and over from everyone, that it's our collaborative efforts that we're here to strengthen. And so in terms of voting access, but access to everything else and all of our civil rights, I feel like that's what I would wave my wand to do.
Thank you. Maria, let's hear from you about what you would do if you could make anything happen to ensure that more Vermonters could meaningfully participate.
Well, for me, I think the most universally accessible system is the Australian ballot, and that every ballot would be automatically mailed to registered voters. Even being a member of the Jericho Town Meeting Reimagined Task Force, I've pushed to get them to recommend to the select board that we automatically mail ballots, but they don't want to do it. The excuse is always, oh, well, that's costs a lot of money, but they don't mind sending out hundreds, thousands of postcards to try to get people to these other 2 meetings that we've now implemented. And only, 100 people show up. So I feel like, well, we could forego maybe a few postcards if you really think, the costs are that high. But I truly believe that everyone that's registered should get a ballot and not have to jump through hoops for it. I support hybrid select board meetings and informational meetings. I actually I don't support a hybrid town meeting floor vote because it's incremental change, and I know I have a strong feeling that we never would have passed Australian ballot in Jericho if the option was to move to hybrid. Because a lot of people mention that. They're like, well, why can't we just have people vote online or participate online? The problem with that is it fixes the problem for some people, but it still doesn't fix the problem for everybody. And so that's why I am actually not in favor of hybrid floor meetings. And for me, I feel like there are 2 ways to achieve my goal. I feel like we could, after we passed the Jericho articles, I was really excited, and I thought, well, let's just create a task force. We're going to adopt 2 or 3 towns a year, and we're going to go like Jericho did and educate the town, get all their stats, and push for these articles to be warned for a floor vote. that would take an extremely long time and a lot of effort, and you still might not get it passed. A faster way is to get the Secretary of State and legislature to publicly say that town meeting is inherently discriminatory and exclusionary and pass a law that moves all town votes to Australian ballot.
Thank you, Maria. Kate, what you got?
Ooh, well, after spending years having my rights denied, I am ready for some magical thinking. I have lots of wishes, but I want to highlight 4. My first wish, like Maria, is to make universal Australian ballot voting the law. This is universal design, and it is what is most accessible, especially for members of marginalized groups. This allows for use of absentee ballots, curbside voting, justice of the peace home voting, and takes the burden of requesting many accommodations off those whose votes are currently being suppressed. I believe that you can allow people to vote and eat your potluck cake too.
There are laughs.
My second wish is to change open meeting law so that reasonable accommodations requests do not require open discussion in public meetings. Like, why is this even still a thing? Let's change it now. Wish 3 is that elections law must be changed to remove unnecessary provisions that disproportionately impact marginalized populations, such as petition signature requirements. This is just another example of those burning hoops we invite people to jump through to prove that they really want to earn their civic participation. And my final wish is that we each see ourselves as advocates in these times, every single one of us. Too often, people believe that advocacy is a task best left for leaders, charismatic individuals, or high-profile community organizers. Early this morning, the world lost Alice Wong, a disability advocate who was never shy when it came to sharing her unflinching wisdom and who lived unapologetically. And I want to uplift her words now in this space together for you. Alice reminds us that advocacy is for all of us. Advocacy is a way of life. It is a natural response to the injustices and inequality in the world. Because you're here today, I know that you care about voting access for all. I ask that you consider Alice's words and know that advocacy is for you too. You are an advocate. And so I want to take this opportunity to invite all of the badass advocates in the room to join a brand new coalition dedicated to working on civic engagement and improving the accessibility of elections for disabled Vermonters. We will soon launch a Vermont Rev-Up chapter, which will be part of a national network with the American Association of People with for People with Disabilities. Are you with us? Email me at Kate, K-A-T-E, @vcil.org so we can invite you to our first organizing meeting. I want to conclude with my final question for you. But before we get there, pull out the note you made for yourself earlier in this presentation. Remind yourself of what you wrote. On your drive home today, or tomorrow when you're having your first cup of coffee, or as you move to your next session, answer this question. What is one action you will take to create inclusive community and democracy? Because it takes all of us. You are the advocate that we need, and we are in this together. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
There's applause, Kate.
There was applause. And I'm seeing a lot of connections happening on the faces of the people in the room here. Wow. I think if I had a magic wand, maybe I would vote Kate in as Secretary of State or something like that. But I really think there's work that each of us needs to do individually to confront our ableism. Even those of us within the disability community only know about our disabilities often. We don't know about the lived experiences of people with other realities. And I think as we've come to like a reckoning with racism and white supremacy, we have not come to that reckoning when it comes to disability. And there really still is a lot of like individual work that needs to happen for there to be cultural shifts where those folks who are truly most marginalized and vulnerable in our community are placed at the center where they belong. So with that, we are inviting folks who are participating remotely to feel free to use the Whova Q&A section. If you want to ask a question, we have a few minutes. We can engage in person and with our virtual audience for questions. So let's start with something from the room if there's any questions, and if not, we'll see what's happening in the virtual space. So Dan is going to come around, staff attorney investigator from the Human Rights Commission.
Okay. Hi. So, Laura, I have a question for you about the response from towns when when Disability Rights Vermont went out and surveyed the physical location. What was the response to your recommendations as kind of a general feel? And did you have this feeling that ableism was present, or that people were like, oh, okay, we'll make these adjustments?
I think Mike. It's very unnatural. I think that generally the response is positive. Folks understand that their towns and their polling places need to have accessible buildings, but maybe don't know the ADA standards and don't realize that their ramps are not correct or their doorways are not wide enough. And so generally the reaction is a thank you. It's like, oh, thanks for letting us know that. But it's, occasionally, like I said, we will get a response back from one of the polling places, town clerk saying with a photo, oh, we put the rail on the ramp, or we added an accessible lane next to our parking space. But we really don't know. We don't have a way built into our audit system to do follow-up with people. And certainly we can't, we're not an enforcement agency in that way. So there's no way for us, we can't fine anybody for not being in compliance with ADA standards, short of taking legal action against the towns and cities of Vermont. So I think it's generally positive. Like I said, we've only ever had one polling place refuse to allow a survey.
Will you tell us what town it was? Because we all want to know.
You know what? I looked.
You knew you were going to get that question.
And I've forgotten. I think it was like Hillsdale. Is that a place? Hillsdale? Something. No, something Dale, I think. Shoot. Anyway.
When you find out, you can put it in the chat of the Whova app, and folks can engage more with Kate and the other speakers, especially if they want to connect about the Rev Up in that chat function, and you can individually message speakers as well. But I'll also say that, the Human Rights Commission has the enforcement authority for our state version of the ADA, which is meant to be interpreted the same way that we would want to see our federal government interpret the ADA. And so I am more and more interested in when citizens report very clear, like measurement ramp, like parts of the law that are very clear, you have to do this. Violations, we can start an informal complaint rather than go through a lengthy investigation. We can just write a very official letter warning somebody that we are concerned that they may be in violation and asking them to immediately city takes steps to remediate it. And sometimes that can have a little more weight. And then if they refuse to do that or claim some exception applies, then there is the option to either open up a formal investigation complaint or to just go straight to court to get an injunction. And our office now really does have capacity to do that in a way that we did not historically.
Thank you for that. I have a question for the panelists. When you are faced with such really horrible ableistic comments when you're trying to exercise your rights, what as like a person who is able-bodied but standing there, what would be helpful in the moment for me to do and to react when someone is just like yelling at you, you don't look disabled? That is just beyond. So what do you need from us?
That's inappropriate.
Maria, do you have anything to share on that? About how
I was
allies can
thinking she
support?
should. I know Kate was the kind of the focus of that, but yeah, I have to say I was like, I guess I can relate it to my experience when they shoved me into a different section of the stadium. I was really, really pleased when all my delegates came to visit me because they knew how upset it made me, and they took the time, and no other delegations um, in the stadium came and visited their delegates in the wheelchair section. So just being a support, I think, is really important.
And I'm so much angrier than Maria. Like, I remember, Maria, when you told me that story, I was so mad that the whole delegation only visited you. They didn't like actually just move. Like, how great would it have been if it was an empty section with the Vermont sign? And then every time the cameras panned to Vermont, because that's when Bernie was running, that everybody had actually moved to be with you in solidarity. Because I think this is a moment where we are needing solidarity. And so interrupting it when it happens, as it happens, I don't, I like to punch up. I think punching up is important. So I'm not going to pick on a small town, even though there's still some punching up to be done there. But I'm gonna share an example of the Act 133 working group. There was, and it's recorded. It's 10 minutes of a working group meeting, where I asked our Deputy Secretary of State, as a reasonable accommodation, if I could have the 30 pages of written materials, because I have a disability, I have a brain injury. It takes me a long time to read 30 pages of materials. I can't see them just being scrolled past on a screen. It causes severe pain. I had asked that at the very least, would they please follow open meeting law and providing materials at least 48 hours in advance. They spent some time arguing that actually maybe 48 hours in advance didn't apply to them. And I said, okay, well, like I need a week. I need a week in advance. If you're going to share 30, 40 pages of materials, I need a week. And also that's universal design. Everyone could use that additional time. And there was a 10-minute video clip. It's just epic. I had to go back and watch it a few times because I was like, did that really happen? Oh yeah, it happened. It was 10 minutes of the Deputy Secretary of State telling me why my reasonable accommodation could not be honored. And it all came down to the same reasons that town clerks tell people that their reasonable accommodations can't be honored. Our staff is really busy. We have really important things to do. It's too bad that that's an accommodation need you have, but we can't honor it. You need to have grace with us. You need to be patient with us. You need to stop asking us for things. And so what was interesting to me is the rest of the committee was all there and no one said a word. No one said a word. And so, you know, just even, and I sent out an email after the fact talking about that. It was like, you all been asking for case studies. Darn if this wasn't emblematic of everything we're talking about here. When this happens, interrupt it. And so thank you for asking that question. Interrupt it immediately in the moment, please.
Yeah, I think even just using the word ableism is important to name what we're seeing. And it doesn't need to be like a personal attack. You know, it's just like, are you aware that that could be an ableist thing to say? You know, could be an example, but that's where it's like bystander intervention, growing our skills in that area to be able to stand up for others when we are not the target of offensive and discriminatory remarks. We have a couple more minutes for questions. I saw some hands start to go up a minute ago. Are there still any questions in the room?
I was wondering, can we just put this on the state ballot? Because everyone could become disabled at one point in their life, and this would benefit everybody, whether you're permanent or not. And people need, there's kind of a propaganda around how quaint it is to have a town meeting without the education of how hard it is for people. Like, it kind of has to happen, I think, at a state level. And I'm just wondering if the state could force the towns and have it as a state vote, that the voters get to vote on it with Australian ballot.
Great notion. I'm not exactly sure about referendum to change state law. I know we use referendum after a legislative process to change our constitution, but typically we see state laws change because legislators vote on it.
Yeah, I'm afraid I wouldn't want to put that to a public vote until there was a whole lot of public education about ableism, as Big and Kate have mentioned. I don't know that I trust the public to understand the challenges that people with disabilities come up against.
I see
And-
another question in the back.
Oh, can I just say a few words about that? Sorry.
Of course.
So one thing, I love that idea so much. And I just want to reiterate, because I think this is where part of the messaging problem is a problem with the Secretary of State's office right now. We already have this civil and constitutional right. It exists, right? Like, towns are being advised by the Secretary of State's office to suppress our right to vote. That can stop at any moment. Secretary of State's office can stop at any moment, right? And tell towns, this is what you need to do. They are choosing not to. And so with anything that requires people to vote on a right that people already have, like, that feels like an affront, right? Like, I already have this civil right. Like, I don't need other people to reaffirm it, except for apparently the Secretary of State's office right now.
Yeah, the state of Vermont is in violation of the Equal Protection Clause. We're in violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. We're in violation of the Common Benefits Clause of the Vermont Constitution. I mean, we are by preventing and prohibiting people from voting. I'm sorry, I didn't hear your comment.
The law.
I mean, I think if the efforts are being made, this Act 133, I think everybody has collectively come together to try to make the effort. I mean, what happens if we have no positive results, if we have no good report to present to our legislators in hope of policy change, then, that could be one of the solutions. I mean, something is gonna have to give at some point.
Yeah, and so as we're here to talk about strategies and solutions, when I'm hearing emerge, and litigation is one way to go, and it takes forever, and it doesn't involve the people that are at the center of this conversation and whose rights we're talking about. It involves a lot of lawyers and judges. So what I think the working group was created for was because the legislature was having a hard time figuring out how to solve this problem. And what I'm hearing as a solution is just change the law, just change our election law so that it does not require a town meeting vote to move to Australian ballot vote for each town, because that's what it currently requires. I love that we all want to talk more. And we have one more panel today that is a pretty important topic of immigration. So I'm going to have to ask us to wrap up, and I encourage everyone to use the chat to continue the conversations that we're having today. Track what is coming out shortly about the Act 133 working group, and we expect there to be a contingency of disability rights advocates that are either crafting an appendix or a separate report to illustrate the grave concerns we have about the recommendations that are currently what's on the table with that working group. And then we will need to push for legislative consideration of better solutions than another working group.
But call the Secretary of State's office.
Yeah, you can also try calling the Secretary of State's office. No, just use the mic.
Sorry.
I love
Call the Secretary of State's office, or, just reach out and let them know you're aware that this is happening and that you want there to be universal design for our elections process, so that all people have accessibility, not only people with disabilities, but people with language barriers and people who need childcare, and folks who have mobility issues due to aging, and everybody who doesn't have access and needs universal accessibility.
So one final thank you to everyone and our three panelists who have, really been putting in a lot of labor to work on these issues and to advance the rights of all folks to be able to participate in democracy. Thank you. I know you will not stop your work, and I will be here with you. And I know that people in this room have your back as well. So thank you.